All right. Well, um, we're here live on Bother the Father. We're here in our dining room. Uh, well, lighter turnout tonight, but that's all right. So if there are any questions, we can maybe open the floor. Looks like we got someone just joined us online. So, any questions, feel free to ask. Maybe as a teaser in some ways. Today also is the Solemnity of St. Louis, King of France. So it's rather interesting here in our archdiocese. So it's also the kind of the 200th celebration of this feast day in our diocese. Since this year we celebrate our 200th anniversary. Um, it's rather interesting when there's a patronal feast day that in the area where it's celebrated, that it's elevated automatically. Anywhere else in the world, today would be, except for maybe in France, today would be a optional memorial, which means people could celebrate it, maybe not celebrate it, whatever. Even within our own diocese, though, it's rather interesting how it's celebrated. So, for instance, in St. Louis City and County, it's a solemnity. But outside of St. Louis City or County, it's considered to be a feast. So it has to be celebrated regardless within our archdiocese. But if you were in Lincoln County or Jefferson or Franklin County, St. Genevieve, you wouldn't celebrate today's solemnity. We celebrate as a feast. Now, there are many questions about maybe why that would be. Um, I think more comes down to how the diocese was structured, like how it was actually like put together. So, if we recall, our diocese actually came from New Orleans. Actually, at one point, we're a part of Quebec. It's very interesting how that goes out through history. But Bishop de Burgh, which was the bishop of Louisiana Territory, which included St. Louis, pretty much everything north and west of the Mississippi River, was the bishop of this large, sprawling area. And actually, there was kind of a falling out with him in New Orleans with the congregants there. Of course, in the United States, a lot of times what would happen was you wouldn't have like homegrown priests like in other places, right? So, in most places today, um, maybe not most places, but many places today, you kind of foster your vocations internally. So, there's an aspect of permanence for priests ordained to a particular diocese that they stay in that diocese. They're not going to other dioceses. They kind of stick around. Well, with the coming of the United States, especially Catholics in the United States, there weren't priests there, right? So what tended to happen was priests would come over with the people, and particularly in the culture they came from. So if you had German immigrants, they would have German priests. If you had French immigrants, they had French priests. If you had Irish immigrants, you have Irish priests. Well, that's kind of what was happening at the time in the United States before the founding of the country. When St. Louis was founded, this was sort of a fur trading post. It was founded by French settlers, but there were really no priests here that were actually could like go in right away and celebrate mass and hear confessions, all that good stuff. So many of the immigrants brought them with them. So what tended to happen was when these parishes were being formed, these places were being established, the people kind of had a say on who the priest would be. Um, what some parishes would hire their own priests and establish it that way. The bishop didn't really have. I wouldn't say he didn't have any say, but oftentimes the bishop allowed it because, well, hey, I don't have any priests either, so it's best just to kind of put someone there that knows the language and can celebrate the mass for the people. So, what happened with Bishop de Burgh was there was a group of congregants, again, which was kind of decried by the church. We call congregationalism, meaning the people aren't in charge of how these things go. That also is kind of considered to be associated with the Americanism heresy. So, when America was founded, there was a lot of kind of leeriness about this experiment in the United States, especially when it came to church governance, because of course the church has always been established by a bishop, right? So the bishop was the one that had final say. Priests kind of shared that ministry in the administration of particular parishes and in church function. So when you start having these congregations bringing their own priests, even in some cases establishing their own, lay boards, governing the church that way, it was kind of looked at with a rather leery eye by Rome. Um, and again, that kind of was really decried. And congregationalism is not really something that we practice in the church. Now, we want to be clear about this. It's not that congregation people and the lay people don't have a say. It's not that lay people can't advise. Obviously, we have that in the church, but the final say was really with the pastor or the bishop. So Bishop de Burgh was kind of ostracized and even exiled in some way away from Louisiana, New Orleans, and so he came up to St. Louis, actually St. Genevieve to be more precise, and kind of set up a parish here and kind of was living here. Even though he was the bishop of the territory, he was not the bishop of St. Louis, though he was the bishop of New Orleans. But from his, I guess, experience came our own diocese. And of course, the first bishop of that diocese was Bishop Rosati in 1825. So, all that to say is that, today we celebrate our patronal feast day of St. Louis. And if you're looking kind of like how that was established, we had such a wide, vast area and territory. I think the way that was set up was that, okay, well, within the region of St. Louis, we will celebrate that as Solemnity, but eventually these territories are going to be broken up into more dioceses and archdioceses. So we're not going to force that upon everybody. Now, maybe at the time in 1825, it was, but as time went on, especially in the pontificate of when we just celebrated recently, Pope Pius X, there were many more dioceses established here in United States under his pontificate than before, and so we saw a lot of other dioceses that we're the mother diocese of that kind of came from us, and so today it's more, I guess, because of that understanding of that there could be more dioceses coming out of our diocese. The decision was just to have more of a particular celebration within the border of the St. Louis region. Still a feast day in other parts of the diocese, but particularly for St. Louis and St. Louis County, we elevate that to a Solemnity because, of course, we're named after St. Louis IX, the King of France in the 13th century. So, little history lesson, a little bit interesting connection here liturgically with our area. So, yeah, there you go. Floor is open. Anyone would have any questions?
It sounds like congregationalism is what a lot of the other churches practice at this point.
Yeah, so many other denominations kind of practice that, right? So there would be like kind of a board of elders, presbyters that would kind of hire their own pastor, right? And we don't have like centralized, structure. Yeah, okay, right. If we didn't have bishops or something like that, that would kind of make sense, I guess. The purpose of having the structure though is to ensure that orthodoxy is being taught, and that's what makes it so difficult. Of course, there's this kind of aspect that people talk about. Oh, the 42,000 different congregations or different Christian faiths. That's kind of red herring in many ways. Many of these denominations, they all do have some unified aspect of teaching and understanding. But there's kind of an aspect where instead of having a bishop or pope, you have a pastor, and based on what they believe or what they preach and teach, that kind of becomes the norm for the people. And also makes it difficult because if, let's say, a pastor does preach something that's in line with, let's say, biblical teaching, or even with tradition, let's say, they could also be removed by that same board because maybe some particular people on the board don't like what that person says. Whereas in the Catholic Church, there's an understanding that no, when you send a priest, if they're not preaching what the church actually upholds, the bishop should be the one to be known that, and even reprimand the priests to the point where they might lose their faculties to actually celebrate mass. It's not just like moving around. It's okay. You are not preaching the faith. You are not teaching it correctly. Therefore, you have no allowance to do so anywhere. Um, which some would argue might much more severe in the way the church handles that because, well, the priest has a lot of responsibility. They should be preaching and teaching what the church teaches. And if they're not, well, then they should be removed in that regard. That's a violation of their vow. That's a violation of what they've been called to do. Um, so, yeah, there are other denominations who do practice that. Um, but also, again, it's kind of interesting that it kind of came from the Catholic Church first, but was also condemned by the Catholic Church as something to be avoided. Well, I mean, also too, we see kind of the remnants of that even recently in our own memory with here in St. Louis with what happened to St. Stanislaus. Stanislaus was allowed to kind of have a lay board with the stipulation that the priest, the pastor, and the archbishop were part of that board. And the archbishop had final say to any changes of any of the bylaws that were promulgated by the lay board. And what caused the big rift there was that they changed them without the archbishop's approval, as well as removed the archbishop and the pastor from the board, which caused a canonical because this kind of agreement with the archdiocese predated the current canon law, which is explicit about church governance being handled by the bishop and a duly appointed pastor. Um, so the issue there was okay, well, you violated your agreement, so you now have to either rectify that, meaning put the bishop back on and everything else, or you follow the current canon law. And it appears that the lay board at St. Stanislaus didn't no one do either, which is why they brought it to secular court, and in a unprecedented, some would even argue, a violation of justice. Um, the court stood with the lay board. And the reason that was such unprecedented is because in any other case, when it became an issue of church matter, um, the secular courts would usually defer to the ecclesiastical laws, meaning canon law, whatever laws are established for a particular church, and they would interpret that and look at that in order to actually come up with a ruling. Primarily in the civil, I mean, these are all civil cases usually, like who owns the property, all that kind of stuff. It's never really a criminal, but I mean, even though there are criminal cases of church people, um, and the church would also say, yeah, they should be also, if they violated laws, criminal laws, they should also be prosecuted and tried. Um, so that's what made it so unprecedented is that the courts have always sided with ecclesiastical law. Whenever the law of a particular church says, they would usually rule. In this case, they didn't, and so they gave the church property to this lay board, um, even though it was a clear violation of their own bylaws as well as ecclesiastical law. So, yeah.
Wasn't a lot of uh, the St. Stanislaus issues financial?
Well, I think part of that was, I mean, so the question is who has control of the church goods, right? And basically, based on the agreement established by Archbishop Kenrick back in the 1850s, um, the lay board had control. I mean, now again, the priest and archbishop are part of that board, so they had some say. But if there were a vote that were cast, and let's say a majority of the people wanted to spend money on, let's say, a new furnace, okay, but even practically speaking, if a new furnace is needed, I mean, I imagine that a pastor and the archbishop would be great. Let's do that. So I think that only happened though after the agreement was breached, and so there was, I think, a lot of more. I think ultimately what that was all about was a power grab on the part of this lay board, um, who were ultimately excommunicated. But I think what the part of the story I think that's um, missed is of those original six people, the lay board, five of them reconciled with the church. So I mean, that you won't find on the news, right? That okay, there was actually reconciliation in these cases, but at that point the damage is already done, and the property was under the care of this particular board. I don't know where the stance is now. I mean, I know that um, the priest that was hired by the board to come minister there was from Springfield, a validly ordained priest. Was excommunicated as well when he left his diocese and came here. Um, Apparently, though, he is at the point he retired, and I know they were trying to find another organization, like a more overarching hierarchy to kind of pick them up, but apparently nobody will take them. So I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen there with them now. Um, in some ways, in some ways it shows kind of the short sightedness of all this. Is that okay, we're going to hire this guy, but then what after that, right? Um, Obviously this person going to retire or end up, dying, and then what are we going to do there? Are we going to try and get another priest excommunicated and bring him in, or how's that going to work? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's just sort of the fruit of when you start trying to do your own thing. These are the consequences of it.
Well, I think, uh, well, what I was referring to was the financial issue, is that might have been why the, secular courts, uh, had the tendency to decide.
Well, I mean, you could say that, sure, but that was at the heart of the matter anyway.
Mm.
And so even if you look at, regardless, there's been actually court precedent in these things that would actually, not just Catholic but any denomination, they would look at the actual, what do you have written as part of your law, right?
Mhm.
And they would even look at the agreement and say, well, and I think if you look at the agreement, you say, well, here's what the agreement originally said, that you did have full autonomy in these things, but you then violated the agreement by changing the bylaws without proper approval.
Mhm.
That's a violation of that's a contract. You violated the contract. That contract is now null and void. Okay, well, the church also envisions this too. It says that we have regular canon law, and here's where our canon law says that those goods are under the jurisdiction of the local bishop, and his duly appointed pastor has autonomy to use them for the good of the people and the good of the parish. Um, I mean, I think our law is very, very clear about that, and it used to be that uh, secular law is very clear about that. That's why this is such an unprecedented thing. That was I mean, and if you look at the history of the court, it's never happened that way,
Mhm.
right? That the ones that violate the law were the ones that were rewarded with the goods. So I don't know, you know. I think also there was a lot of at the time. I remember. I mean, I wasn't even living in St. Louis at the time, but I know there was a lot of support for the people of St. Stanislaus by the people of St. Louis, even good Catholics that were like, "Oh yeah," and it was kind of portrayed as sort of a bully tactic that the Archbishop was kind of trying to bully these poor, innocent parishioners. Um, but what actually happened there was it was a violation of law. They violated the contract, and so it wasn't. It was just all the Archbishop was trying to do was follow the law. So, which is what he should do. That's what he's called to do. So good. Any other questions, comments, concerns, heresies? Anyone online? If you have any questions, there, feel free. If not, let's call it a night. I'm good with that too.
Uh, We're, celebrating 170 years of the parish. Uh, how has, uh, how has this parish fit into, our archdiocese? How has it uh, helped shape the
Yeah.
archdiocese?
Well, yeah, if you think about it, our parish was established just 30 years. I mean, within a generation. One could say that St. Anne is kind of the part of the first generation of the diocese of St. Louis, right? So, um, yeah, I think if you look at those parishes that were around at that time, as a matter of fact, our principal was gave me like it was really more towards the schools, but like in this area, there were only like four schools that were established parish schools, and even like less, four or five parishes. So again, as time goes on, I mean, you could say that basically everything west of us um, was part of St. Anne's Parish, right? Even beyond. Um, so even the St. Anne territory was rather large, and actually it's rather large today if you consider that with presentation boundaries, it's actually rather long, but somewhat thin. So it kind of goes from the St. Louis uh, city border all the way to the airport, basically. But it's really kind of between Highway 70 and Page, basically. That's kind of how wide it is. So. But before that, it was yeah. I mean, you had Maryland Heights, Chesterfield, even over into St. Charles County would be considered St. Anne territory. And I think the fact that it was Father de Smet, who was a missionary priest, he was kind of ministering to all the people in that territory and kind of going all over the place. But his home base was here in St. Anne. So no, I think Saint Anne had a very important role in shaping the current archdiocese and even current uh, other dioceses that we were kind of part of in that regard too. So, wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Have a happy Solemnity of St. Louis, and we'll see everyone next week. Next week is still August, I believe. So we still have another one more Bother the Father, and then we will do a Friends, Food, and Faith probably on the.
Well, next week is I think it's the first of
Is
September.
it? Let me pull it up. Let me calendar real quick. Um, if that's the case, I have to figure out a topic. No, you're right. Next week is the first. So next Tuesday is September 1st. So we will have Friends, Food, and Faith. Boy, I don't know. I don't know what a good topic might be. I might have to think about that a little bit. We have the Feast of the Archangels in that month. We have Exaltation of the Cross. We have Our Lady of Sorrows. So maybe like kind of looking at that as sort of like a mini Lent, mini Triduum in September. We also have the uh, Ember Days. Or, I'm sorry, Rogation Days, which is sort of a tradition of the church. So I don't know. Maybe we can talk about different things. Look into it, and I'll get back. If anyone has any suggestions, let me know. Email me, call me, and we'll take them under consideration. All right. See everyone next week. God bless.